So, good afternoon, everyone. We're delighted to welcome you here to Venable for our 48-hour afterwards. Some people are still in shock. Some people are very excited. But I'm really happy to have such a big crowd. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in what's going on, what's coming forward. We have Supreme Court questions. We'll have questions on what's going to happen in lame duck. So, and we want this to be as interactive as possible. I might ask Senator Pryor a question, but anybody else on the panel can chime in. And I definitely want to save a lot of time afterwards for questions from the audience, because we will have encapsulated a few areas, but I have already know that 3 people have asked me several other questions that I might not have focused on. So, you know, feel free to ask anything when we get to the audience participation. So to say this election is historical is totally an understatement. There are probably many forces that collided to elect Donald Trump, but here are 3 that have been identified by a famous pollster, Peter Hart. First, Hillary Clinton was a deeply flawed candidate. Second, Trump was brilliant at manipulating broadcast media into giving him unlimited free time. Third, and this is the element of the 2016 election that pundits consistently underestimated, a large sector of our society is deeply, viscerally angry. In the end, it was an election of fear, and Trump's message was the fear of what was happening to America, and Clinton's was about fear of Donald Trump. All the pollsters were wrong. I don't know if we can ever look at a pollster again and go, really? But they were all wrong. So with that, setting the stage, let me introduce our panel here today. Many of you know Senator Mark Pryor from Arkansas. Senator Pryor joined Venable in 2015. He heads up our legislative practice and also heads our state AG practice, and we are delighted that he is part of our team. Rob Smith, down there. Rob is a total Capitol Hill veteran. He's been in the Venable legislative practice for almost 15 years, worked on the House side for Congressman Wes Watkins and Joe Heffley, and brings a great deal of knowledge in many areas of the legislative world to Venable and our clients. Our tax guru, Sam Olchek. Sam chairs Venable's Tax and Retirement Policy Practice Group. He spent 8 years as the tax attorney for the U.S. Congress, both on Joint Committee on Taxation and the Senate Finance Committee. And I am sure that Sam is going to get asked an enormous amount of questions from this audience. And lastly, but certainly someone we hear very much about, Carol Ward, is relatively new to Venable. She focuses her practice on policy involving financial services and the housing finance market. She's currently working on issues before the House Financial Services Committee, the Banking Committee in the Senate, Treasury Department, CFPB, and the Federal Housing Finance Agency. She was an attorney at the Department of Treasury for 5 years before she came over to Venable. So, Carol, we welcome you and delighted that you're here. I have been at Venable, Peggy Hudson, the moderator, for about 8 months. I have a long history of lobbying in Washington. I won't go through my whole resume. It's in the book. In fact, you can probably just skip that page and move on. But let's get started because we have a lot of good questions. So from the overall panel here, what was the one dynamic that drove this election? Senator Pryor, why don't we start with you on that one?
Well, I do think that this is a very complicated analysis that this election will undergo here in the next few weeks. But I think one columnist here in D.C., and I write this down, he says, yesterday, he was talking about the vote on Tuesday, he said yesterday the working class whites vented their economic and cultural frustration. And I think that there's just a lot to that. If you look at the numbers, and we're going to see a map in a minute, you see how red it is in the rural areas and the wider or less urban areas of the country. I think that's at least one good snapshot of it.
Echoing what Senator Pryor was just sharing, I think it was the economic recession and the recovery was uneven at best across the country, especially in the rural areas. They feel like they've been left behind. So while a fair number of us have had, our investments, our 401ks, or pension funds may have bounced back, You know, folks who were traditionally supporting Trump haven't gotten their jobs back. Their home values have not increased, and they're disaffected and looking for change.
Yeah, I agree. Sam?
No, I'm going to stick with the answers given by the prior.
Senator Pryor and I gave a similar pre-election presentation in our LA office over August, and I had at the time, the role of, I guess, I wasn't trying to defend Donald Trump, but I was at least trying to answer why he was having some success, and I listed the qualities of Trump supporters, and they were all over the map for different reasons. But in the end, I think the main one was a rejection of Hillary Clinton, and I don't think people saw, or the polls didn't show how much angst there was over her becoming president.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
think about, I want a quick poll here. We can all chastise the pollsters the day after, but in January of this year, which do you think would be more likely, Donald Trump elected or the Cubs win the World Series? I mean, they're both pretty far out there.
I told you I had a good panel. I think it's pretty fair to say to the room that most people felt like this was the longest election season in history. Not the prettiest election season that we've ever had. But I'm going to ask Senator Pryor if he'll give us kind of an election overview, if you will, and walk us through, kind of what happened and how we look today.
Sure. If we can go to that slide on the Electoral College, that'd be great. And if she's pulling that up, let me just say thank you all for being here. It's great to have you here at Venable. I just wish we had something we could talk about today. Now, I think that basically the big story of 2016, without a doubt, the number one story far and away is just quite simply Donald Trump. He is a guy that has defied every expectation politically known to man. He's broken every political convention. He's had some really bad days, some really bad weeks, but he keeps coming back. And it is just an amazing story that he will now be the next president. We've already talked about all the polling was wrong, and I mean virtually all of it. I mean, there were very few polls, and very few, if any, that really predicted this result. I think we are in somewhat of an unprecedented territory here. Peggy asked a few moments ago about what was the one thing about it. I think it's hard to say one thing, but I just want to follow up on one thing Rob said a minute ago. I think there is a rejection of the establishment. And in this instance, the establishment, quite honestly, is a little bit the Republican establishment. It's a little bit the business community establishment, because if you look at like the CEOs from the Fortune 100, I don't think Donald Trump had any of those folks that had endorsed him and supported him. I think the news media obviously was constantly talking about and trying to expose Donald Trump as unfit, et cetera. And then, as Rob said, it's also a rejection of just the political establishment. I think that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton represent that. And there is a good analogy that can be drawn with Brexit. And I think that just like in Great Britain, when all the so-called experts in Great Britain said it's a terrible thing to do, the country should not even consider this, it's awful, it'll have all these negative ramifications, the people knew better. The people, there's a distrust of even experts, and that's kind of a rejection of the establishment as well, a rejection of status quo. So anyway, I think in this race, it'll be studied for a long time. And let me just say one last thing, if I may, Peggy, on that, is that, for lobbyists and lawyers, the three basic food groups are fear, uncertainty, and change, right? Those three things, those are the things that lobbyists and lawyers really thrive on, and I hate to say that, but fear, uncertainty, and change. We have all that right now. And what I would recommend to the Venable team who's here, but also to all the clients and everybody else, is that you should really spend a lot of time over the next few weeks thinking through what the ramifications of this administration are. And I know that's one of the reasons you're here today, but please talk to us about it. We'd love to partner with you and help you think through these things. We actually do have two lawyers here at Venable who've been involved in the Trump campaign, Trump transition for months now. So we are on the inside of that process as well. And, you know, hopefully we can help you all navigate this and make good decisions in the coming weeks as we get to 2017.
Senator Pryor, I'd like to dig into that just a little bit, though, because, you know, for me, I look at this and Trump got elected, but you have a Congress that was at 13% approval rating, and yet everybody got reelected. I just don't get that. I mean, it was a repudiation of the people that are elected, but yet the American people reelected all of them again.
Yeah, I don't think this is a weird election. I mean, we've known that the whole year, right? It's been a crazy year. The whole election cycle has been pretty unusual. But I think that one of the things we see is they're showing the House map right now, and you see how red it is. But one of the things that we see is that this is, from my standpoint, this is not a wave election. You know, Donald Trump won. He was the big surprise on election night. But the Democrats did pick up a couple of seats in the Senate. They did pick up 7 House seats. Is that the final number, Rob? 7? Six or 7. I saw both numbers. Okay, let's say 6 House seats. And in fact, Kevin Turner and I were talking earlier, you know, the Republicans picked up state attorney general offices and some of these other state and local offices. So all that's good for the Republicans, but really, I don't think it really qualifies as a wave election, but clearly things are going on. Peggy, I would say this. I would say that, again, we're going to try to sort this out and try to understand what went on. But one thing that I have not seen the news media really address is the dark money. Back when the Koch brothers and the Koch funding network, I'll call it that, they announced early on that they were going to spend $800 million this cycle. And then when it became apparent that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee, they said, we're not going to support him. So that money got spent somewhere. My guess is, again, we don't know because it's not transparent, but my guess is that that money went out into these state races. It went into congressional races, Senate races, and that money actually had a big grassroots effect that helped Trump get over the line. Now, again, I don't know that for sure, but that's my guess that that is at least part of the explanation of what happened here.
Thank you. Rob, maybe to follow up on that, can you kind of give us a sense as the new chairmanship, sort of a leadership overview? I know many people in this room are dying to find out whether you think Speaker Ryan will keep his job.
In a word, yes. I was just actually on a call earlier today with Speaker Ryan with the owners, and he was hoarse, but he was giddy. And he had a meeting with Mike Pence and with Donald Trump, working lunch at the Capitol. They went and looked at sort of where the presidential platform will be for the swearing in and all that kind of stuff. So yes, I do think that Speaker Ryan will be reelected, and I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm amongst all the various groups, Tuesday group, Freedom Caucus, RSC type people. There's just a lot of enthusiasm for what they can get done. And obviously we're going to get to that in a minute with Sam and Kara. Go to the slide on the important dates. Okay, so just some dates for people. If you're a Capitol Hill geek like me, all the freshmen who were elected come back in on Monday, and they have their orientation. On November 15th, Tuesday, House GOP leaderships will happen. I don't anticipate any significant changes. Speaker Ryan will be reelected. Majority Leader McCarthy will be reelected. Whip Scalise will be reelected. And Catherine Morris Rogers from Washington, the conference chair, she will be reelected. There are a couple of lesser seats that are, vice chair of the conference, secretary of the conference, jobs that get you kind of a seat at the table, but nobody anywhere else but on Capitol Hill really knows about those jobs. So they'll be open. I think the GOP will still want to show some diversity. Right now, there's females in 2 of those roles. Right now, so far, I haven't seen any female Republican members put their names in the hat for those jobs. I do think that one thing that's significant, I was talking to a couple of my Democratic colleagues, is it looks like House Democratic leadership will stay the same. For, I think it's probably been, what are we on, 5 cycles now? of Leader Pelosi, Mr. Hoyer, and Mr. Clyburn. So, in the minority that many years and still not changing your leadership structure, maybe kind of shows the lack of bench strength on the Democratic side. November 16th, Senate GOP election, so next Wednesday, no significant changes there. And then that should say the week of November 28th, the week after the Thanksgiving holiday, that's when the GOP steering committee comes back to select potentially new chairs and possibly do their committee assignments. But that's tentative, and I'll talk about the new steering committee in just a moment. Of course, the CR expires on the 9th, and we have swearing in on the 4th. Next one. So, new chairs, the chairs that are up in the House on the Republican side, on the majority side, are there on the left. It appears now, I've got my friend from Lockheed here, I believe Mr. Frelinghuysen will be chair of the full committee. Mr. Rogers goes to DOD appropriations. I heard that he cut a deal to support the F-35 for 2 years, then Kay Granger gets it. Energy and commerce is a big one, and one that matters a lot to this firm. It is a battle between two really good members, John Shimkus from Illinois and Greg Walden from Oregon. Both have great resumes. Both are good members of the party. Mr. Shimkus has seniority, so there is, if you've got two even candidates, my gut tells me that Speaker Ryan, the steering committee, will go with seniority in this case. But Greg Walden served as the NRCC chair for the last 2 cycles. And he had a great cycle 2 years ago, and even by losing 6 seats on Tuesday night, that was considered a great cycle for an NRCC chair. So he's got a lot of friends that he's gotten elected in these last 2 cycles. So that will be a spirited battle. I have seen Mr. Walden's name floated for some other jobs, potentially as head of the FCC and the administration. He's a former broadcaster, so that might alleviate a race between 2 good members and make the choice easy. Education and workforce, that will be Virginia Fox from North Carolina. So I believe that will be the only female Republican chair for the House Republicans. She'll get that. Veterans Committee, I believe, is going to be, I can't recall right now who's going to be the lead of that, but that'll have a new person. House Admin, which is normally called the mayor of Capitol Hill, that will be probably either Greg Harper from Mississippi or Rodney Davis from Illinois. The next chair of the NRCC, who gets to defend this majority in 2 years, whatever policies are enacted over the next 2 years, is going to be Steve Stivers from Ohio. Roger Williams from Texas has said he wants to do it as well, but I think Mr. Stivers is going to get the job from Ohio. The head of the Republican Study Committee will be Mark Walker, I believe, from North Carolina. There's been some other names, but I think Mark Walker, who's only a sophomore, has the lead for that. And the Freedom Caucus, or the Freedom Club, as I call it, is likely going to be chaired by Mark Meadows, also from North Carolina. So you have 2 Marks chairing those two committees. And I think the Republican Study Committee needs to and will sort of reestablish itself under some new rules and some new guidelines and sort of how they operate. Right now it's too big. It's basically every member of the House except for Freedom Caucus members and Tuesday group members, so it's just everybody else. Big inside baseball story has the new structure of the House GOP steering committee. After the Eric Cantor loss a few years ago and sort of the shifting of, if you looked at the leadership at the time in the House, they were all 5 from blue states. And when Mr. Cantor lost, there was a shakeup, and Mr. Scalise got in from Louisiana as a red state. They also started talking about needing to change the steering committee. So they haven't finalized it yet, but there'll be no more at-large members. They're going to do it now by 20 different regions, and you get to have 2 people from each region. So that way certain states don't get closed out. The example was always North Carolina and Virginia was paired together, and because North Carolina had more Republicans, they always got to appoint their person to the steering committee. And committee chairs will no longer be automatically added to the steering committee, but they will be allowed to be in the room when freshmen are picked to be on their committee or other people are moved to their committee. So, and this is a list of freshmen to watch. That doesn't mean that there aren't other great freshmen, but on the Republican side, these are just some people that I've seen. I believe Liz Cheney will be a serious hard worker. Roger Marshall, interesting to note down there, is the one guy that beat a Tea Party guy. So he primaried a Tea Party guy in Kansas, and he won. Now, Tea Party guy has already said he's running again in 2 years. So I think that Speaker Ryan and others are going to do everything they can to give Roger Marshall good jobs and good things to do and make him look good. And then Francis Rooney there from Florida was just elected. Don't be surprised if he is not the lead Republican nominee to run against Bill Nelson in 2018. He's a very wealthy guy, doesn't need this job, he's former ambassador to the Vatican, so keep an eye on him. But like I said, this list, there are a lot of people that are worth watching. It was just sort of a quick list for me. Any questions on the House and kind of how this is all going to run in the next 40 days, I guess? Okay, great.
Maybe we could parlay that. Are you done, Rob? Parlay that a little bit to the Senate from there?
Yeah, sure.
And clearly the Democrats are looking at their party right now and trying to figure out how they too may restructure. But we know one particular person in the Senate that's going to play a big role, and that will be Chuck Schumer. So I'm going to ask Senator Pryor if he'll sort of shift to the Senate for a second and kind of talk about that.
Sure. This is the Senate map that you're seeing right now, and so you have 51 Republicans, is that right? 51. And then 48 Democrats, with Louisiana still being undecided. They have a 30-day runoff there, so we'll have that in about 4 weeks. I would say that Chuck Schumer is going to be a major player, obviously, in the Senate. I think everybody knows that his relationship with Senator McConnell cannot be worse than Harry Reid's relationship with Senator McConnell was. I think that Senator Schumer is actually very respected and very much appreciated on the Republican side, as in the role he played was kind of an ex officio kind of leader in terms of trying to get deals done and broker agreements and things like that. And he was actually pretty good at that over the last 3 or 4 years. And it looks like the Democratic leadership team will be he and Durbin again. They are having their leadership elections Tuesday, and they still, under the Senate rules, they'll still have to work out the committee sizes. It looks like if the committees shrink at all, it'll be a few committees, maybe just by one. So that'll all start. That whole process will really start on Tuesday, and some of that will get wrapped up fairly quickly. So, we're still waiting on some committee assignments and whatnot. But basically, I think Schumer will be very good. Let me say this. When I was in the Senate, my approach was this. Whether I had President Bush or President Obama, whoever I had, I wanted them to be successful, right? I want a strong president. I don't want to undermine the president. The question is, how does Chuck Schumer and the Democratic caucus want to work with the president and want to work with the Republican majority and want to work with the House? I don't know the answer to that yet. I'm not sure they know the answer to that yet. So I hope that President Trump will send the right signals and will do some right things. I think one area that could occur early would be the Supreme Court vacancy. If he goes really hard right on that, that's not going to be a good sign. If he comes right out of the box and wants to burn down everything over repealing Obamacare, that's not going to be a great sign. So anyway, we'll just have to see, and I think that what you'll see in the coming weeks will be a little bit of a dance between the Senate Democrats and the administration with the Republican majorities, and just sort of see where they want to be. But a lot of that does rest on Chuck Schumer's shoulders.
Thank you. Let's sort of move now, shift a little bit into some of the financial policies, because I think that President-elect Trump ran a good bit on. And I'm going to kind of veer to Kara here for a second. And so, Kara, what do you think that Trump's regulatory financial proclivities, as you say, or priorities will be going forward? And maybe you could kind of set the stage for us there with regard to the financial part, CFPB, the regulatory piece, et cetera.
Sure. So, 2 days ago we had this presentation in the can, and I had a lot more slides on financial services than I do today. So what you're looking at are some pieces that we pulled out, but I think the single most important thing to look at is our first bullet point. Because President-elect Trump didn't spend a lot of time on the campaign trail talking about financial services, he gave us some red meat when he says things like, I'm going to bring back Glass-Steagall, and I'm going to repeal Dodd-Frank. As you start to peel back that onion, you wonder, what does this mean? What is he getting to? And I think the best way to look at that and to make predictions about what's going to happen is to see where House Financial Services and Senate Banking are, because they're going to be the thought leaders and sort of the horsepower behind, I think, a lot of where President Trump will be going in the financial services arena. The single most important thing for the folks in this room, and I think the folks generally, will be regulatory relief. What does that look like? And as we think about it, the segments that are most likely to benefit from regulatory relief in the financial services arena are going to be your community banks. When you see the Senate Banking Committee makeup, you're going to see a lot of rural states in there. Folks there are noticing that the access to credit is very tight for consumers and small businesses. So those people have the greatest, I think, opportunity to gain. And the second opportunity to gain there is going to be in your fintech. So we're talking about these sort of financial services companies that are finding ways to bring financial services to folks outside of the major banking system. In a deregulated environment, these companies are going to have new opportunities to push themselves forward, perhaps embrace something like a fintech charter at the OCC that some want, or the sandbox approach that the OCC is looking for. But that's also going to feed into this access to credit. If you have more financial services providers, you're going to find opportunities for consumers to get their car loans, more credit cards, maybe even mortgages, and small businesses really being able to expand, grow, or even start. When we think about big banks and regulatory relief, we're thinking about Dodd-Frank and the Financial Stability Oversight Council, the FSOC for short. I think in a Trump administration, we're going to see the FSOC perhaps diminish in its power and its ability and interest in designating new entities as systemically important. So when you're designated as systemically important, for you folks in the room who don't live and breathe this every day, you're going to be required to keep more capital, or as we say, more money in the lockbox. If you're not designated, you're generally a smaller institution. But I think what we'll see pretty soon, or what regulatory relief looks like for big banks, is that threshold, which is now currently set at about $50 billion, moved up substantially to maybe $500 billion. And what does that mean? That means that banks won't have to keep as much money in the lockbox, as much capital set aside, and hopefully they'll be able to use that money to lend out. And again, it's an access to credit issue, so small businesses and consumers benefit there as well. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. But I think following on that, we have to certainly talk about a tax bill. We know both Secretary Clinton and now President-elect Trump spent a lot of time talking about tax proposals when they were running. And our guru, Sam, is offered to address this at length for us, because I do believe there are a lot of questions with all the proposals that are put forth. So, Sam?
Thank you, Peggy. I always start these things with a favorite political prayer that the late Congressman Mo Udall used to utter, which is, "Dear Lord, let the words that I am about to utter be gentle and tender, for tomorrow I may have to eat them." There's a fair amount of detail regarding the Trump tax plan. It is, I would say, a very ambitious tax reform proposal. And I was listening to Kara thinking 2 days ago, I was about to, had we had this conversation, it would have been a very different story regarding Secretary Clinton's tax proposal. The key issue with President-elect Trump's proposal is a question of whether the country can afford it. What I would call a secondary policy issue is the distributional effects. In other words, what income category would be most benefited from the proposals. So the slide that you have behind me is it summarizes the key business tax proposals in the Trump tax plan. The centerpiece of it is a 15% corporate tax rate. We all know that the corporate tax rate right now is 35%, so this would be more than a 50% reduction in the corporate tax rate. But a fair amount of businesses in the United States are through LLCs or other pass-throughs. So here's one situation in which the Trump tax details are still being developed. Based on our understanding and based on what the think tanks are telling me, what President-elect Trump is focusing on is to allow a 15% rate on pass-throughs, on LLCs, on S corporations. But if the pass-through is a quote-unquote a large pass-through, and that definition has not been provided, it would be a 15% tax at the entity level, and then any distributions from the entity to the S corp shareholders or the LLC unit holders would be treated as a dividend, and that would be taxed at a 20% rate. So when you combine the two, the effective rate is around 32, 33%. And that is consistent with what President-elect Trump has proposed on individual taxes. He wants to reduce the highest tax rate from 39.6% to 33%. The third point is another one where President-elect Trump has been very vague on the details. It appears to the think tanks, to me, that what he is saying is that he will end all overseas deferral. As you know, multinationals that have overseas operations have an ability to maintain capital overseas, and it's not subject to U.S. tax until it is repatriated. It appears that President-elect Trump would put an end to that. Now, the next related to that is what to do with the $2.6 trillion of untaxed overseas earnings. And what President-elect Trump has proposed is to impose a repatriation tax. To the extent that the amount is in cash or cash equivalents, it would be a 10% tax. If the amount is invested in assets, it would be subject to a 4% tax. Now, this is important because, or this is relevant in that another element of President Trump's domestic economic package is increased spending on infrastructure. He has said that he wants to spend up to $1 trillion over the next 10 years on infrastructure development, and the question is, how is he going to pay for that? Well, part of the money would come from this repatriation tax proposal. Another uncertainty, the Trump tax package calls for the elimination of all corporate tax expenditures, but no one exactly knows what is a corporate tax expenditure. If you look at the historical definitions that my former employer, the Joint Committee on Taxation, that the Treasury Department uses, a corporate tax expenditure is defined as any deviation from the norm. So if you take depreciation, for example, any type of accelerated depreciation, that is considered a corporate tax expenditure because it is a deviation from the economic norm. The President-elect Trump also wants to eliminate the AMT, and he is willing to allow businesses to write off all their investments. What the plan says is that it will give businesses a choice. They can either write off all their capital investments, but if they do that, then they will lose the ability to deduct their interest expense. Now, you wonder, how did this come about? President-elect Trump submitted, or he released an original version of his tax reform plan late last year in 2015. It was estimated to cost approximately $10 trillion. The view was that even that was too much for the economy to sustain. So this was added in the revised proposal that was released earlier this year. So again, this is what we're focusing on, is the business side. I will tell you that for those of you in the tax and accounting sectors, you know, as I said to someone before, this December is going to be a December to remember, and 2017 will exceed all expectations in terms of work. On the individual side, President-elect Trump has called for shrinking the number of tax rates from 7 to 3. He would have 3 rates, 12%, 25%, and 33%. Capital gains would be also reduced. He wants to eliminate the net investment income tax, so the maximum capital gains tax would be 20%. He wants to dramatically increase the standard deduction. It's currently $6,300 for individuals, $12,600 for married filers. He wants to more than double that. He wants to make that to $15,000 for individuals and $30,000 for married filers. He wants to eliminate the individual AMT. For those of you in the real estate sector, not good news. He wants to eliminate the special treatment for carried interest. Now, I happen to think that this is going to happen in 2017 because I think the GOP has almost, I would say, accepted it. If you go back and you look, Jeb Bush in his platform called for the repeal of carried interest. Chris Christie called for repeal of carried interest. It might be the one tax policy where Secretary Clinton and President-elect Trump agreed upon. The last major element of the individual tax proposals is that President-elect Trump would cap deductions for high-income individuals. In other words, you take all your itemized deductions. If you are a single filer, you would be limited to $100,000. If you are a joint filer, you'd be limited to $200,000. That is the quick and dirty summary of the tax plans. If I could take one more minute, 2017 is going to be a busy year. That's all I could say. So, whereas 48 hours ago you asked me whether tax reform was going to happen, the answer would have been virtually no chance. What a difference 48 hours makes. Without getting into too much Washington speak, given the fact that the Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate, there are budget rules, specifically what's known as the reconciliation process, that allows the Senate to consider legislation with certain protections. One protection is it only requires 51 votes to pass. And as Senator Pryor said, there's either 51 or 52 Republicans, depending on what happens in Louisiana. I believe that we are going to see a very concerted effort, perhaps in the first, Chairman Brady from the Ways and Means is saying the first 100 days, if the Congress is going to use the reconciliation process, I believe that schedule is a bit ambitious. But I would say that sometime before September, there's a very decent chance that we will see tax reform. The reason that I'm hedging is because the House and the Senate, notwithstanding that they are both under GOP control, they have very different viewpoints on what tax reform could look like. And truly, tax reform is one of those where the devil's in the details.
So with that, I want to just let you know that for any of you that are contemplating hiring Venable as a law firm, we have very thick shoe leather, and we will be up on that hill fighting this because it sounds like small business, manufacturing, and just about every industry out there is going to get hit. I really want to now open it up to the audience. I have some more questions I could ask, but I think, we want this again to be as interactive. So let's start. Who would like to pose the first question? And don't be shy. There is not a question that you cannot ask. Please, yes.
We've talked a lot about the tax cuts. What about expenses? What are the thoughts about the administration's budget? Bob, I noticed that the PR expires on December 9th. Happy reminder. What happens if, remind us how much impact Trump presidency and Trump administration have in the interim in the budget? And I would just say I'm probably coming from a different perspective than most of you because I represent a nonprofit. And our capital is social capital as opposed to financial capital. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, wow, what's going to happen next? So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Brittany, we go to the slide. Thank you for that. And I think we're all probably fairly qualified to answer what's going to happen in lame duck. But when you go to the slide on presidential personnel, just real quickly, in case folks are interested, as Senator Pryor mentioned, Senator Pryor mentioned, we do have colleagues that are working at the transition office. I have friends that are over there. And just to give you a little bit of perspective about what's going on with the transition team right now, they just moved into their official GSA space today. Today was a move. It's as chaotic as you might think. It's moving at lightning speed. They have in place what are called landing teams. The landing teams are doing all the vetting and the probing of the current agencies, but they will then not necessarily be the people that go in on day one, and then the boarding teams will be the teams that go in on day one. I will say a little bit of inside scoop. I have heard from some friends that are over there that there's a little bit of friction between all the Chris Christie people and the DC types. Christie people have been described to me as very New Jersey. Whatever that means. And so it's, I'm sure there's some spirited conversations and discussions going on over there, but, I think there are some good people that are in place. The next slide, this is going to be probably very difficult to see. I apologize for the poor quality of it. We just got it kind of late this afternoon, but this sort of lays out. These are not cabinet secretary type appointments. These are people that are sort of in charge of what will be the next steps for transitioning into. These people may not even necessarily go into the administration, but there are some friends of ours there. Probably, now back to your question, I just wanted to use that opportunity since you mentioned the transition to get this in, because I thought some people might be interested in it. I did the call with the speaker today, and they still don't have a plan, a definite plan for how they're going to deal with the lame duck and funding 2017. There's a couple of policy things that they want to achieve. They've got to pass the defense bill. They're really trying to pass the 21st Century Cures Act. They're trying to get that in there. But the main thing is they have to fund the government. I'm hoping it will be no drama, but I'd love to turn it over to my colleagues to talk more about to your question.
Liam, maybe you want to take that part on the expensing part and how the Trump proposal might deal with that.
Is your question going towards whether there will be funding for nonprofits or discretionary spending? Is that?
I think it's more there. What is the federal agency budget, the structure? What's the position on what that comes with? What is
And that is one of the issues why I'm hedging a little bit in terms of tax reform, because I think one of the questions that has to be sorted out is how much tax reform, how much can the government spend on tax reform, or how much revenue can we, can we walk away from? And I believe that President-elect Trump will be under a fair amount of pressure to reduce discretionary spending. So I think that there is a concern in terms of discretionary spending. We have the debt ceiling that comes back into play on March 16th, and it's unsure how much space the fiscal conservatives are going to give in this process. So.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Along this transition line, Trump was as critical of the Republican establishment at the time as he was of his opponents. So the question is, during transition, did he reach out to any of the Reagan or Bush administration for people to help him in the transition? If not, who are these folks that are sitting over there making some of these decisions?
Well, nothing deals like winning. And I think you're seeing a lot of that. I will say that yes, there are quite a few old hands that are working over there and that are back there that served in Bush 41 even. I do believe they will have to draw on filling all those. They posted on their website today. Help wanted 4,000 positions. So it was a bit pithy, but it's true. And they've got to fill. Everyone's thinking about all these cabinet positions, Attorney General, Secretary of Defense, all that kind of stuff, state, but they've got to fill a lot of jobs. And I think, Peggy, you said earlier today, those halls are going to be pretty empty for a couple of months.
But Rob, there's actually a part of that which I think bodes well to that question, which is, we're a lot of lobbyists also sitting in this room. Will he reach out to the lobbying community, or will it be like Obama, where there's no, I don't want any lobbyists involved?
So far, there are a lot of lobbyists working over there, and there has been no indication that there will be a ban on lobbyists. So I think the lobbyists will be in there. But I think that you'll see a lot of health staff going into the administration. I mean, where else are they going to get people? President Obama drew a lot from academia and that world, maybe, but I don't see Trump really going there. They're going to have to pull from health staffers, and I think you'll see a lot of them heading over that way.
Yes.
And you've got two candidates up there for Attorney General, one of which would be probably easily confirmed by his colleagues. The other, I think, would be a risky. How do you see the Giuliani versus Sessions thing like that? That was just my feeling. And what about, did you comment on the report about a possible Jamie Dimon to the Treasury?
I love my, Senator, you served with Jeff Sessions. You and I had a conversation about that earlier.
I think Jeff Sessions would cruise to a fairly easy nomination. Even though Democrats know that Jeff is very, very conservative, they have a lot of respect for him, and they just know him, and they know his integrity and his character. So I think he would go through fairly easy. I don't really think Giuliani would, and I think he would have trouble there. In fact, I would say the same. Newt Gingrich is also on this slide. I think that would be a very problematic process for this new administration. So I would think that he will not really. Maybe he's being seriously considered, but at the end of the day, they'll go another direction there.
So Treasury, I saw the same reports about Jamie Dimon, and I could say it's anyone's game, because what we're going up against is Goldman Sachs versus, Jamie Dimon. And so, originally my first instinct would be say, maybe not Jamie Dimon, because he was so blistered during TARP and the bailouts. But I couldn't say that Goldman Sachs came out of that untarnished either. So my instinct is that Steve Mnuchin is more likely. But I know that doesn't answer your question.
Everybody's game now. Yes, sir.
Just get back to the House side a little bit, and like Senator Pryor mentioned, it does move quickly, like on the Supreme Court nomination to get somebody radical in there. It could be a problem. What about with the House Select Oversight Committee in terms of what are the promises in terms of getting Hillary back under the lamp?
It's a really good question, and not one that I thought we were going to have to answer. Honestly, I had, as Kara said, the deck was baked a couple of days ago, and it was going to be, because there was going to be no let-up. I mean, it was going to get more intense had she been elected. I'm not sure now where they go. I'm sure some effort will be continued, but I definitely don't think as many people will be watching. But they were ready to go. It was going to be a miserable first quarter, first of the year, first half year, with all of that stuff that was going to go on.
Paul. Right here. Sorry. Yeah.
Issue question for Kara on financial services. How we're paying your thoughts for housing finance reform.
Sure. So there's three camps, right? Maybe we can start first with where the Trump camp might be. It's rumored that he is sticking close and getting a lot of good advice, or at least let's just say advice, on the housing market from John Paulson. And John Paulson, if you're familiar with his background, he made billions shorting the subprime market. Right now, he's an investor in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and has been very clever in the way that he's been building a lot of political will around town for recap and release, which is taking the GSEs back to basically where they were in 2001, allowing them to build back up their capital rather than shipping the money back to Treasury, and turning them back into their plain charters that they've originally had, ending the conservatorship and allowing them to basically turn back time, operate as if it was 2001 again. So that's possibly where Trump is. But the bigger question is, what's House Financial Services and Senate Banking going to do? We have Senator Crapo taking the gavel back in the Senate Banking Committee, and he worked very hard and in a bipartisan fashion on Johnson Crapo, previously known as Corker Warner. I don't think that concept is still the top of the line proposal out there. A lot of people, after it came out of the committee, have had more time to digest it. It was seen as too complicated, and in particular, Democrats weren't able to rally behind it. Most importantly, Ranking Member Sherrod Brown, because of the affordable housing piece. So I think we're going to see earnest discussion on GSE reform in the very short term. And there's two proposals that, thanks, Brittany, we have some slides on it. We have two proposals that I think are going to battle it out for the intellectual champion in the Senate. And that's going to be the Parrott, Sperling, Zandy, and Ranieri proposal, which created basically what's known as Norman Mac, we're going to call it for short, where the private sector takes the first 2.5% risk on all the mortgage bonds. The next 3.5% is going to be from the mortgage insurance fund, and then the government stands behind the bonds in a catastrophic risk place. Some people say that this proposal is a nice balance or a nice complement to Johnson Crapo, but then there's a rival to it that is also equally well thought out, and it's coming from Michael Bright, Senator Corker's former staffer, and Ed DeMarco, former FHFA director. And theirs is basically a Ginnie Mae model, where the bonds that are turned out and government guaranteed are going to have significant credit enhancement placed on top of them by the private sector, and basically a common securitization sort of platform that combines VAs and FHAs and private labels and government labels all off the same platform. I think those two proposals are going to battle it out. And the open question there is what happens to multifamily, and both of those proposals are not really covered. So that's on the Senate side, and I see earnest sort of think tank discussion happening there. On the House side, we have Chairman Hensarling's PATH Act. And the PATH Act still exists, and, just to remind everyone in the room, it basically eliminates the government guarantee on the conventional mortgage market, but retains it through the FHA and VA, although it limits the FHA to 50%. Those discussions are going to continue to happen, and there's a couple action-forcing events that could accelerate that discussion. One is the financial position of Freddie Mac. Some people are looking at their derivatives book, and you saw about 3 quarters ago it declared a loss. They both just returned a fair amount of money to Treasury this quarter. But if something goes haywire as mortgage interest rates tick up, something could happen to the Freddie Mac derivatives book that would require it to draw again on its outstanding line, we'll call it line of credit with the Treasury Department. And I think that would probably spur some immediate response from Congress. And let's hope it would be earnest GSE reform discussion and not necessarily some sort of knee-jerk reaction like jacking up G fees and lowering loan limits.
Wow.
Sorry, that was a lot of work.
Very good.
So what happens, please?
Well, let me answer that if I can, and these guys may want to chime in as well. But I personally, when President Bush was there, I didn't like all the signing statements he did on legislation, and with President Obama, I don't like all the executive orders he's doing. I do think that new President Trump will try to undo those executive orders. The truth is that's not that unusual. That does happen quite a bit. I assume he'll try to undo a lot of these. Obviously, probably number one on the list would be the immigration executive orders, and he would reverse that and kind of return it back to probably more what the statutes say, et cetera. So I think he will do a lot of that. And I think that one of the things he will do very quickly, as quickly as he can, this is me reading the tea leaves, looking at a lot of the campaign rhetoric, et cetera, is he will really try to hit a lot of reg reform. One of the mantras right now of the Republicans is regulatory overreach. And I think what he can do by executive order, he'll try to do some of that early. I mean, possibly day one, if not day one, month one, and try to do that. Now, as we all know, it depends on what regs you're talking about and how far you can go with some executive orders. We understand that. But anyway, I think that he will try to do that. Charlie?
I would agree. In the tax world, there are a number of proposed regulations, family discount partnerships that are in proposed form, there's also certain corporate international regulations that have also been issued in proposed form that arguably go beyond the original intent, and I think that is something that President-elect Trump can do on day one. And I think he will, I think he wants to go in saying, this is something I could do right away. I've already started keeping my campaign promises. So I expect that in the regulatory world, particularly regulations that are still in proposed form, they are going to get careful scrutiny, and many of them will be withdrawn.
Yeah, for 8 years, House Republicans and Senate Republicans, mostly House Republicans, have been sending letters to the White House and to the various agency secretaries asking them to stop or delay or change, because really it was their only thing they could do. They could pass something out of the House, they couldn't get it done in the Senate, and all they do would send letters. I think there'll be a lot less letters now going from House Republicans to the administration.
Thank you. I'll take a couple more, and then we're going to close this.
From those that are still in the state to those that have passed, so for example, the federal security laws, and also, of course, with the differentiation with the blacklisting, which of course is under the court injunction. But what are your thoughts on how Trump would approach what he thinks he can do and what he wants to do on this stuff? So those laws are already passed.
There are certainly regulations that have been finalized in recent months that President-elect Trump will go after. I think the process is a bit more cumbersome than a proposed regulation. I think there has to be a new notice, and you have to open under the APA. You have to go through certain procedures. I'm thinking in the tax world, there's been a lot of discussion in debt equity regulations, 385, that caused a furor in the business community. I think that is going to be on the list. So to the extent for regulations that have been finalized, there is a more pronounced and it's a more cumbersome process. But I think that those two will get careful scrutiny, and I think many of them will be they'll open a new reg project to withdraw them.
If I could just dig in or expound on that a little bit. So I think some of us were watching late this summer when we saw a lot of folks, and maybe most importantly that I saw was the American bankers came out with a proposal that looked at a law called the Congressional Review Act. And basically this is a law that's been on the books for a long time that says that any regulation finalized with a significant economic impact, which is a pretty low bar, could be nullified by the next Congress by a simple vote. So that law includes a complicated way of backtracking to when those regs need to be finalized. That date's May 20th, right? Here's why I don't think the Congressional Review Act or the CRA is necessarily the sort of ticking time bomb that a lot of us think about. It hasn't been used ever. I think maybe once it was suggested, but the vote failed. It's still a law on the books, though. And if the Trump administration looks at it carefully, it may be a way to undo a fair number of things, including, we didn't get a chance to talk about some of the rules coming out of the CFPB over the summer.
CR. Can you take one more?
He asked if we'll have a total food fight over the Supreme Court nomination. The answer could be yes. If I were President Trump, if he would listen to what I'd say, I would try to get him to put that off just a little bit. And now, look, you're going to get some bitter debate about this by the Democrats just on principle, because this should have been President Obama's nomination. It should have been done a year ago. So you're going to, whoever he chooses, it could be Mother Teresa for all we know, he's going to get a lot of harsh criticism, and the Republicans in the Senate will get criticism. But there could be a major food fight. I don't think that's wise for President Trump. I think he needs to do whatever he can to try to find a nominee that is, you know, agreeable to most Americans and agreeable to a large portion, it wouldn't be a majority, but a portion of the Democrats in the Senate, so that can pass with a pretty healthy number. That's what I would hope. But it could be a food fight.
Hey, Brian, will you go just real quick to the 2018 map? And I just wanted to end on this one and let Peggy close. 48 hours ago, this was my happy slide. This was kind of how I was going to, you know, how I get out of bed in the morning, because the numbers for in a midterm look really good. It would look great for the Republicans to take back the Senate. They don't have to defend as many. They really don't have that many that are in play. So this was the happy slide. It's still a happy slide because it's a pretty good story for Republicans. But it's what we all were sort of talking about throughout the fall. It's like, well, just buckle up for 2 years and we'll get the Senate back in 2018. Well, not the case. And these same candidates who were feeling probably pretty good about 2018, and probably some House guys and other people looking at tougher Democratic seats, thinking they would be probably more in play in a midterm because the president typically is fairly unpopular after their first 2 years. It's still a happy slide, but it's not as happy. So if you want to go to your final cartoon, good one to wrap up.
This is the real happy slide coming up here, the final cartoon.
Only 56 months to go until the 2020 election.
Well, okay, so as the moderator, I get to allow myself to ask the very last question. We can ask it from the audience perspective, but I'll start with our panelists. Let's say Donald Trump is a one-term president, and we clearly know that Hillary Clinton is done. Who are those future leaders that are going to run on the Democratic side and possibly on the Republican side? I mean, who should we be kind of paying attention to and listening to the news of? That man from Texas who might run on the Democratic side, or who on the, you know, so give us some good insight here.
Well, on the Republican side, it was all about who was going to be our nominee in 2020. And so now people like Paul Ryan or Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, who were sort of thinking about being the 2020 candidate, you know, obviously that's off for a little while. So I think the Republicans have a good young bench. We'll just see. We have to wait and see on 2020 and kind of where those guys go. I mean, this really is a great opportunity for Paul Ryan, but he's got to be thinking, oh, that was my window. That was my way to get to the White House, and it's on hold a little bit.
I can say with no factual basis, just gut instinct for a good cage match, I'd like to see Elizabeth Warren versus Comey.
Mark, you want to add anything on the Democratic side?
I'd say Tim Kaine and Cory Booker on our side.
All right. So with that, let me thank all of you for being here, and let us thank the panelists.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Don't ever hesitate to contact anybody at Venable. We are here to help you. We're delighted that you're here today, and for that we have refreshments. So join us.
Thank you, guys.